going to answer a very interesting question. Do smart people feel more lonely? Now, let's begin. In 1888, one of history's most iconic geniuses supposedly chopped off his right ear. Labeled desperate and crazy, Vincent van Gogh is probably the most famous example of a stereotype surrounding intelligent people. The smarter you are, the more isolated you get. When you imagine someone who's hyper-intelligent, what kind of person do you picture? Are they friendly and easy to talk to, or troubled and misunderstood? The tortured genius cliché has become somewhat ingrained in our culture over the last couple hundred years. In fact, some say it started with Van Gogh himself. When we look back at some of the most influential characters like Virginia Woolf, Nikola Tesla, and Alan Turing, we view them as lonely revolutionaries, extraordinary outcasts, intelligent people tormented by their gifted minds. Of course, we didn't just make this stuff up. Many of these talented people isolated themselves from friends and family. They struggled with mental illnesses like depression and bipolar disorder. They seemed to only find solace and company in their work, whether it be painting, writing, or unlocking the secrets of the universe. It's no surprise that people think loneliness and brilliance go hand in hand. But did their intelligence lead them down this lonely road? Are smart people actually lonelier than everyone else? First, let's take a step back. So far, we've been using the terms intelligent and genius interchangeably. The truth is, there's a pretty large distinction. Only a tiny portion of the most intelligent people actually qualify as geniuses. If you want to see whether or not you have genius-level intelligence, you typically need to know your intelligence quotient, or IQ. If you score upwards of 160, it means you're part of an elite group of exceptionally gifted people. You're smarter than 99.9997% of the entire population. But here's the thing about IQ scores and intelligence as a whole. They're unreliable and frankly inconsistent. You can be amazing at one thing and terrible at another. You can have an IQ of 130, yet be less successful than someone 40 points lower than you. The first person to notice this also happened to be a pioneer of the IQ test, a psychologist named Lewis Terman. After developing the Stanford Binet intelligence scales, Terman wanted to test if someone's IQ could predict their future. To study this, he rounded up a group of intelligent children who he called the termites. Now, these kids weren't picked because they were geniuses. The termites' IQ all fell north of 135, which isn't in the genius range. Terman's goal here was never to prove that all geniuses become tortured souls. He didn't intend to weigh in on whether people like Van Gogh or Turing were actually victims of their own intelligence. But, in a way, he kind of did. His actual aim was to simply watch how the termites' lives played out. He wanted to see for himself if smarter people had any advantages in life. Do smart people have a higher chance of being wealthy? Would they establish as many friendships? Are smart people prone to mental illness? Terman would answer these questions and more over the next 70 years of his study, making it one of the longest in history. For us, Terman's most important discovery didn't come until decades after the experiment begun. To make this study work, researchers had to consistently survey each termite about their lives. When they compared their answers throughout the years, they noticed something unusual, something that shines a different light on the stereotype of the tortured genius. The researchers found that termites weren't any lonelier than the average person. In fact, most of them were happily married with loving families. They had no trouble forming lasting friendships. They excelled in high-ranking social positions. For some, their whole job revolved around connecting with other people. My point is that the termites' intelligence didn't stop them from relating to the world around them. With this in mind, you can look back through history and re-examine some of those lonely outcasts. For example, Virginia Woolf was happily married for most of her life. The last thing she ever wrote actually highlighted how happy her husband made her. Albert Einstein, another well-known genius, was upbeat, social, and had countless friends. He was one of the most revolutionary thinkers of all time, while maintaining a healthy and fulfilling social life. So does that mean smart people aren't really any lonelier? All these intelligent people lived relatively normal lives, so does that mean the tormented genius is a myth? Well, what if we've been looking at the question the wrong way? What if you're not lonely because you're smart, you're lonely because you're a specific kind of smart? Like I said earlier, intelligence is an extremely diverse concept. Some people are smart because they can do calculus in their head. Others can easily conceptualize the origins of life. Can you really say which one is smarter than the other? In Terman's study, he chose people using one definition of intelligence, their scores on his IQ test. It's true that he didn't notice any signs of isolation in his termites, but what if there's another kind of intelligence that can make you lonely? A few years ago, a renowned analyst who happens to have an IQ of 185 explained what it's like to walk a mile in her shoes. As she discussed her relationships and career, she made one thing very clear. Despite having a normal social life, she has always felt somewhat lonely. But it wasn't because she was too good at her job or feared that people would dislike her for her intelligence. She felt lonely because the majority of society doesn't think the way she does. No one in her life made connections, drew conclusions, and solved problems like she did. No one used the same cognitive models that she uses every day. Things that seemed obvious to her made no sense to everyone else. To make matters worse, she couldn't see things from their perspective either. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't dumb down her mental framework. She could hardly ever communicate where her loneliness came from because no one could understand her perspective. In the end, she concluded that intelligent people just see the world in a way few others do. So what kind of intelligence is this? What does it take to change your fundamental understanding of the world around you? It's not something you can measure in grades, degrees, or net worth. Intelligence, in this context, is your capacity to look inward. It's your ability to honestly reflect on and deconstruct your own thoughts. This is sometimes called emotional intelligence. At its core, emotional intelligence is understanding your feelings and the feelings of the people around you. If you have average emotional intelligence, you should have at least 3 different skills. First, emotional awareness, or your ability to identify feelings. Second, emotional application, which is when you can apply your emotions to thoughts and behaviors. And finally, emotional management, otherwise known as emotional regulation. This means keeping your emotions in check when you need to. All of these sound pretty normal, right? That's because emotional intelligence isn't something we usually think about or measure. There's actually no official scale to test someone's emotional aptitude. Maybe that's because a lot of scientists don't really think emotional intelligence exists. Or maybe, much like intelligence as a whole, it's too diverse to put on paper. Either way, emotional intelligence is a powerful gift. It's probably best explained through art, which has been a powerful medium for emotionally intelligent people for thousands of years. Imagine you're standing in an art gallery. You're staring at a painting of a sunrise, but to you, it doesn't seem like anything special. A few minutes later, a guy walks up next to you. He's immediately moved by the artwork, almost like he's seeing something you're not. Well, what if he actually is? Many people with high emotional intelligence have described their isolation in a very similar way. Your intellect lets you think deeper about who we are, what we do, and how we feel. But unlike discovering some advanced mathematical equation, you don't discover new things. You explore feelings and experiences that all of us have, but don't pay attention to. Ralph Waldo Emerson puts it best when he says, "In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts." Emotionally intelligent people look for that meaning hiding under the surface, and it goes further than just our feelings. You might find yourself breaking down commonly accepted ideas like social norms and expectations. So while others see a bland sunrise, you may be experiencing something deeper. These emotional realizations can be enlightening, but equally isolating. When you tear down ordinary constructs, you may start to see them as meaningless. Or maybe the connections you made now feel hollow. While everyone else happily goes about their daily life, you're stuck questioning things like love, altruism, and identity. And it's not like you can just ignore these thoughts. Once you see something deeper, it's all you can see. If one day you understood the deeper meaning of that painting, could you go back to seeing it as a boring sunrise? The strangest thing about emotional intelligence is that it doesn't take some profound genius to get here. Whether you have a high IQ or not, you may be feeling lonely in your life because you're a certain kind of smart. The kind that lets you analyze and understand things that no one else does. So, while the stereotype of the tortured genius doesn't really exist, there is some truth to it. Intelligence doesn't make you antisocial, troubled, or crazy, but it can make you feel lonely. Thank you for watching.